When the sun goes down in Pakistan's industrial hubs, the lights often follow. The country is dealing with a severe, ongoing electricity crisis, driven by a heavy reliance on imported fossil fuels that are expensive, volatile, and dirty. If you look at this model of the country's total installed grid capacity, you'll see it sits at 46,605 megawatts. But one massive chunk dictates the entire system. 25,937 megawatts, or about 55.6%, is generated entirely by thermal power plants burning coal, oil, and gas. Keeping these massive facilities online requires a constant flow of imported fuel. That single requirement drives up consumer tariffs, adds crushing weight to the national circular debt, and keeps the power grid under constant financial stress. Pakistan is trapped in a cycle of high-emission, high-cost energy. Escaping it requires a large-scale, radical alternative to survive. On paper, nuclear energy looks like the perfect answer. The reactors currently operating in Karachi and Chashma run day and night, and they produce almost zero carbon dioxide while generating electricity. This pair of gauges highlights a fascinating efficiency gap. The needle on the left shows that nuclear power makes up a tiny 7.7% of the grid's total installed capacity, but the needle on the right shows those same few plants generating 19% of the country's actual electricity. They also appear incredibly cheap to run. The raw fuel cost to generate a single unit of electricity from reactors like Karachi K2 and K3 is only about 1.5 rupees. So if nuclear power is cleaner, highly efficient, and runs on cheap fuel, why doesn't Pakistan simply turn off its thermal plants and replace them entirely with nuclear reactors? This rapid calculation reveals the immediate scale of the problem. If you subtract the current nuclear capacity from the massive thermal baseline, you are left with a staggering deficit of 22,317 megawatts. Closing a gap of that size represents a logistical and macroeconomic puzzle that transcends basic construction. Let's start with the money. That 1.5 rupee figure is highly misleading because it only covers the physical uranium. It ignores the overall generation cost. This bar graph shows the hidden requirements. When you add massive upfront capital, long-term financing, and rigorous safety systems, the true price of electricity jumps to 15 rupees per unit. Nuclear plants require billions of dollars in upfront investment before a single watt of electricity is generated. For a power sector already drowning in circular debt and capacity payments, that kind of initial cash simply doesn't exist. Even if funded, nuclear reactors take years to construct. You freeze massive capital in sites that won't produce power for a decade. Attempting to secure hundreds of billions of dollars to build 22,000 megawatts of new capacity all at once would instantly bankrupt the power sector long before the project was finished. But let's assume the money is there. We still have to physically acquire the reactors and the raw uranium to run them. This map reveals a strict diplomatic reality. Because Pakistan is not a signatory to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, it is locked out of the open global market for nuclear technology. That restriction forces the country to rely heavily on bilateral cooperation with China to build and operate its nuclear fleet. Domestically, the situation is similarly constrained. Pakistan has limited internal uranium reserves, meaning it has to negotiate complex, hard-to-secure foreign supply contracts just to keep its existing plants running. You cannot safely scale a 22,000 megawatt grid expansion when your physical supply chain relies entirely on a heavily restricted, single-source geopolitical pipeline. Even if we completely bypass the financing and the diplomacy, we eventually hit the hard physics of the electrical grid itself. To understand why a fully nuclear grid fails, you have to look at how electricity is dispatched. Grids rely on baseload power, which provides a steady minimum of electricity, and peaking power, which ramps up and down to match human behavior. Nuclear energy is strict baseload power. This flat line represents a reactor running continuously at 100% capacity. But this jagged line shows actual demand, which fluctuates wildly. Fossil fuel plants provide flexible peaking power to catch these massive swings. If you force 22,000 megawatts of inflexible nuclear power into a highly erratic grid, you generate massive amounts of wasted energy during low-demand hours and risk structural grid failure during peak times. Looking back at the 22,317 megawatt challenge, it becomes clear that a complete one-to-one replacement of fossil fuels fails on financial, geopolitical, and physical levels. Energy grids are highly delicate ecosystems. The concrete infrastructure, the global supply chains, and the physical flow of electrons are all inextricably tied together. Nuclear power remains a vital long-term pillar, but a full transition requires rewiring the nation's entire financial and physical operating system.